G'day guys. The previous video that I did on Novavax sort of generated a few questions and a few other things that people have heard on the grapevine around the place. Obviously, those people who are touting some of this nonsense, not providing any evidence, that doesn't surprise me because they don't have any. They're just making up shit and nothing new there. Anyway, let's get into it. So I had this one from Anthony Caplet. He actually asks about a couple of things. I've seen a couple sources that have stated that nanolipids used to ferry mRNA into the cells are toxic and were the most problematic components in getting any previous approval by Moderna. I haven't found anything in that regard. I actually looked and tried to find something. I haven't. Unless I'm not Googling properly, I don't know, but I haven't actually been able to find anything. And I'm not surprised that I haven't been able to find, because people have just made it up. The mRNA technology that's being used, I'm criticizing it, me, Bart, and a few others, for a whole lot of different reasons. Okay, so it's in regards to autoimmunity and stuff like that. I mean, when we look at basically the RNA-based vaccines put at risk of immune-mediated diseases, this one talks about this sort of stuff, and they've actually talk about in sort of general, sort of like a review, this reactogenicity of COVID-19 mRNA vaccines in individuals suffering from immune-mediated disease have therefore a pre-existing dysregulation of the immune response has not been investigated. So they haven't looked into this, but things have come up in the media, in stuff that's actually been talked about. It may be hypothesized that the immunosuppressive agents prescribed to these patients mitigate or even prevent side effects related to vaccine. So they're saying that some people that actually are suppressing their immune system seem to not be getting some of these issues. Then they say, beside the mechanism, molecular mimicry of mRNA vaccines may give rise to a cascade of immunological events, eventually leading to the aberrant activation of the innate or acquired immune system. And RNA vaccines have been principally designed for cancer and infectious diseases. This innovative therapeutic approach is based on the synthesis of RNA chain coding for desired antigen proteins that exploits intrinsic immunogenic of nucleic acid in order to avoid degradation, blah, 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 that are encapsulated in nanoparticles or liposomes, which is what they bloody are. They call them nanoparticles, lipid nanoparticles, but basically they are liposomes. Okay, I've talked about liposomes with supplements. You're getting the drift, which deliver a cargo inside and translate into immunogenic proteins by cell ribosomal machinery. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of confusion in regards to how these react. They have been used in autoimmune diseases as well, with some success, in other cases, no success. So it depends on what is going in. So it's a mixed bag. And that's why we're saying there are risks, okay? So here's the new science, new side effects from mRNA COVID vaccines. They put a question mark. So we've got a situation where people, herpes zoster reactivation, so the herpes or virus can actually be reactivated following COVID-19 vaccination. 6 patients with comorbid autoimmune inflammatory disease may be a new adverse event associated with the Pfizer BioNTech mRNA, suggested a new report. At 2 centres in Israel, there's been 6 cases of herpes zoster developing shortly after administration of the Pfizer vaccine in patients with disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis since December 2020, according to Victoria Fura, MD of Tel Aviv University and colleagues. So we're seeing basically people that have basically got, things like rheumatoid arthritis, existing autoimmune diseases. We're seeing a sort of some sort of reactivity there. Okay. We're seeing people with herpes virus, which is basically, you get the shingles, as it's called. And so we'll actually go into that. Little has been known about the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine. There was another point that I did want to touch, which I didn't on this. Moreover, COVID-19 mRNA vaccines might differently stimulate myeloid or plasmacytoid dendritic cells, generating an unbalance in the downstream cytokine pathway and play a crucial role in autoimmunity and autoinflammation. So there is that risk, and this is from tolerance to autoimmunity. Is there a risk in early life vaccinations? So there are some stuff there as well, and they're looking at this sort of stuff. And because these are mimicking the sort of machinery of a virus, so anything that actually mimics the machinery of a virus, has the potential of creating these things. We're not saying it will. We're saying, so it's a speculation on our part. What we're saying, in the literature, there is information saying this sort of stuff. So I'm giving you both sides on this, that basically there is and cases where they have been used in a positive way. So this is just a general review, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to say in that regard. Also here, these results presumably depend on the higher reactogenicity occurring in younger people that can confer greater protection. So getting a reaction to the COVID virus or to this sort of thing that mimics by replicating like the COVID virus in younger people can confer greater protection towards viral antigens, but also predispose to a higher burden of immunological side effects. We know from basically, that you can actually get more reactivity. That means an overexpression of the immune system. We know what that's called, a cytokine storm. That will also be dependent on how your immune system is being regulated. That means vitamin D deficiency or not. So it's going to be a mixed bag. Younger people tend to go outdoors more, so they tend to have a better vitamin D status than older people. So the risk may be, it's hard to say, but there are some younger people that stay indoors quite a bit, play on their computers and all that, don't really stay, and are quite severely vitamin D deficient. So they are probably at higher risk in terms of cytokine storm potential. We're saying, we're not saying definitely, we're saying that they will react. So the stronger your immune system, the stronger the immune response. Remember, this is coming in. It's not like the Novavax or the Fluvax or whatever. You've given a small amount with an adjunct to basically create a bit of reactivity, and then the body responds, clears it out, and basically gets immunity and bobs your uncle, and there's no continuation, and then the immune system just calms down. This is in there replicating and not being controlled, so eventually the system, knocks it a lot out. But how successful, where there are concerns, let's put it that way, of certain people being more risky than others. As we say, a lot of this sort of stuff, we know that viruses can, and just in that regard, it's still basically, a sort of a partial virus, because it still has certain things. Can it stay in a more dormant way? We know that can happen. Could it reactivate at a later stage under different circumstances? Hard to say. This is all speculation. The whole thing is, why take the risk? That's what we're saying. We're not saying that basically, it's the end of the, world or all, but there are risks. let's continue on this thing. There's another case study. Was it 44-year-old with Scorzin syndrome, which I bloody don't know what the freaking hell that is. Probably not important anyway, anybody can look it up. Who has been treated with hydroxychloroquine. She had a history of varicella and had not received a shingles vaccine. Okay, so again, shingles issue. 3 days after the dose of vaccine, she developed vesicular skin rash with prickliness, along with a lower back pain and headache. The symptoms resolved spontaneously within the subsequent 3 weeks without treatment. She was given the second dose 4 weeks after the first. So she was, less of a problem. Maybe, we've got a rheumatoid arthritis situation. So you can see there are a number of things, people sort of reacting different ways and all that. So obviously they put a question mark there, and obviously it's going to vary between people exactly what sort of effects we're going to get. So this is the mRNA stuff, but as far as, the nanolipids, it's a non-issue. It's a bloody non-issue, guys. It's a phospholipid, cholesterol and fat. Okay, it's a small, this is a 40 nanometer, which is slightly larger. Where if you're looking at something like this Aurora nutritional, the liposomal vitamin D3, it's slightly smaller at 25 nanometers. I've actually done the research on that and aware exactly of what it is. So basically, stealth liposome is a sphere-shaped vesicle with a membrane composed of phospholipids bilayers, which is exactly what a cell or a virus, or a bacteria, or a red blood cell, or anything is a bilayer of fats. Okay, but this is very small, used to deliver drugs or genetic material into a cell. So you can either deliver, just the spike proteins, or you can deliver basically, the mRNA sort of technology, which Pfizer and all these companies are, so you can deliver, or you can deliver a supplement. So a liposome is composed of naturally derived phospholipids with mixed lipid chains coated and sheeted by polymers of, okay? So basically, your own body actually has shitloads of phospholipids. Your brain primarily has shitloads of phospholipids. So basically, this is just a technology which she's using organic material at very small sizes to basically put something in there. Now, in the regards to the Novavax, it's just basically a deactivated spike protein with 2 proline amino acids. So the receptor can't bind to anything. So it can't bind to any cell, can't do, all it can do is just float through the blood system. And as it floats, it will basically, it's got an adjunct that will create some reactivity, and that's what you want, some reactivity, and then the body will respond with an immune response and deal with it and create antibodies. I mean, with that, something like that, you can't create antibodies. The immune system can't identify it. So we're just using an adjunct, which is something from a bark, which is a saponin. So even that part, which is about the so-called toxicity of saponins, I suspect Anthony was either on a mixed diet or he was before on a species inappropriate diet. He would have consumed a lot of saponins. Let's take a look. Oops. Here. Okay, saponins in food. Chickpeas, alfalfa, you know, soya beans. We're talking about not here minuscule amounts like you would get in this vaccine, which is basically the size of, you know, we're talking about the Novavax is 40 nanometers. So we're talking about incredibly small amounts, insignificant amounts, where in foods like chickpeas and all this, you get 50 grams, lentils, 4 grams, you know, sort of navy beans, 18 grams, soy, 39 grams. This is material as consumed per kilogram. So if you were to consume, let's say, 100 grams, which is 3.5 ounces of soy, that would be 3.9 grams. Okay, so you're taking something which is minuscule, nanograms, you know, we're talking about minuscule amounts or very little. And here we're talking about shitloads, many folds over and over compared. So do you think that that's going to have a dramatic effect on your health? Unlikely. Okay. And I suspect he and many others in the carnivore community probably cheat and eat some of these foods and probably are getting far more saponins than they would get from a vaccine. So not an issue either. Only in a crackpot's mind, that would be an issue. Anyway, so we've covered the saponin nonsense that's out there at the moment. We've covered the liposome, you know. We promote this. Some of the people are actually criticizing these nano, the little nanolipid things are actually promoting liposomals for people that have got malabsorption issues. Isn't it funny? And some of these are actually criticizing the same technology which is used by pharmaceutical companies as a vehicle, and all of these, I mean, bilayers of fat. What do you think an LDL is? It's a sort of like a more enlarged version of a bilayer, you know, just a larger version of a liposome. You can either have a very small, incredibly small, couple of nanometers, or you can have a much larger, slightly a couple of more, you know, like 100 nanometers or whatever, slightly more, as a lipid, as an LDL or whatever. I mean, you know, that is harmful. That's going to kill you. Unlikely. Only in a crackpot's mind could you basically come up to say a liposome or a nanolipid, you know, which is a bilayer of, you know, would basically put you in danger. That's what I'm saying, guys. Stop listening to these people. They've got no idea. They're coming up with shit all the time. Proteins will create injury to a site and problematic injury and all that. Fucking hell, I want them to basically create some reactivity. How are you going to get an immune response if you don't get a reaction? You've got to get a reaction. You know, it's a foreign protein. And the body's going to say, you shouldn't be here, so I'm going to deal with you. Like any foreign protein or foreign organism, the immune system responds to it. Happens also when people have leaky gut and certain proteins end up in their body and their immune system reacts. If you get it that chronically, obviously then it becomes an autoimmune issue. But this is, you're not basically injecting yourself every day with basically, you know, these sort of things, are you? This is a one-off. You get a reaction, you get an immune response to that protein, and basically the immune system settles down after that, puts it in your bone marrow, and Bob's your uncle. So if you actually come across the same virus again, you'll respond. That's the whole purpose, you know? So very different in that regard. I mean, just think of those people, the Tsimane people that I talk about in Bolivia who ate shitloads of meat and had infections. The ones we're not talking about, there are two groups there. There are those who are a bit more, you could say, domesticated in a sense. They don't live in the jungles. They actually live now in certain communities and basically do a bit of farming and that. But the ones that are still majority, still involved in hunting and in the actual eating a lot of wild game and stuff like that, those people, they consume quite a bit of wild meat or meat from the jungle. And they've got a lot of pathogens in their body, and their immune system is 24/7 working hard to get rid of these pathogens and all that. It's not killing them. They've got the lowest CAC scores. Remember, I did a chat with Bart ages ago on the Tsimane people, Tsimane people. So again, the body deals with proteins from viruses. It's been doing it for a long time, guys, millions of years. It deals with viruses, bacteria, fungi, all sorts of manner of things, pathogenic protozoa, whatever. So it's been doing it for a very long time. So that's not the problem. Okay. So we need to basically, there are real issues with these sort of things where we've got something which is a mechanism which is replicating and it's basically creating potential in some people, the potential risk of cytokine type related inflammatory responses and other things, reactivating or interacting with other viruses and stuff like that. So there are issues there in that regard. So that's what we're talking about. Sort of other autoimmune diseases, some issues there as well. So we need to be careful what we talk, and that's in the literature. This is basically a mid-page and which looking at the actual literature and case studies and all that. Currently, we don't have enough information, and the reason for it is quite clearly because that was actually published in Rheumatology. So there's actually a link to the study in Rheumatology in this regard. So if people want to go, they can look at it. Okay. In that regard, herpes. So I'll provide the links anyway. But the key thing is, I'm not having a go at Anthony. He hears the stuff. He's actually asking me legitimately, what's the concern here? I'm just saying there is no concern. And even this old stuff about aluminium and stuff like that, we need trace elements of aluminium in our diet. It's part of trace minerals, aluminium. So, and the minuscule stuff that's actually in vaccines is not a problem. We will sit behind a vehicle, or it will be in a city where there's a lot of pollutants in the air, and we'll probably ingest far more into our body of these things, and our immune system's quite good, and our detox pathways are quite good at dealing with a lot of this sort of stuff. So the minuscule amounts we're talking about, the absolute nano, we're talking about even less than the trace minerals that our body requires for biological processes. We even need cyanide. We need everything, but in very minuscule amounts. And the amount in these sort of vaccines is minuscule. So it's never going to create a problem. Probably for people that are deficient, that on a kibble diet, it might even give them a few minerals. So I'm being facetious and joking now, but what I'm trying to indicate is that there is no issue even with that. It's a lot of crackpots out there that are making up shit and have been making up shit for a very long time. There are specific things that are problematic with vaccines and for certain classes of people and certain groups of people. But a lot of the stuff that's out there, 90% is just junk. It's just made up shit by crackpots that have got an anti-vax agenda. And I've always said, if you go back before we had sanitation, vaccination, antibiotics, even though we've misused some of these things, and I'm critical of the way we've misused and not correctly applied these things because we've looked at the lowest common denominator, even in those sort of cases where it's actually caused a few issues for a small minority of people, the majority of the population out there have benefited. That's why we've seen an increase in life expectancy. So the average life expectancy has gone up. Not that people are living longer, but basically less people are dying from communicable diseases, typhoid and all other things related to sanitation, and basically, and certain cuts or whatever wounds which would have been infected and killed you. Nowadays, you take an antibiotic and it deals with it, like septicemia and stuff like that. So these things were, so these that have been improved. Have we abused them and misused them? Yes, we have. But that's basically poor management on our side. It's not really the sort of components and all that. So we can be critical about the poor management and usage and overuse in particular, because antibiotics should only be used very sparingly, in my opinion, for specific secondary infections or severe infections. It should not be used just arbitrarily. I've got a little cold, give us an antibiotic. Doctors should be basically held responsible for that, and they should be actually not allowed to do that. There should be basically guidelines to say you cannot, and make it force and enforce it. Unfortunately, the state talks about it but doesn't enforce it. Then you've got misuse of antibiotics in animal environments. Now, there's one thing about using antibiotics to help an animal that's sick. I've got no problems with that. And even in the dairy industry, if an animal gets sick, they take it out of production, they give it the antibiotics. Once they clear the system, then they put it back into production. That's the best practice. But not everyone does that. That's the problem. Not everyone does the best practice. And then there are others who just outright abuse antibiotics because they know they can use them as a growth factor. So this is what we need to understand is we need better policing in the agricultural sector, and we need to limit these abuses. And we also need to basically restrict the access in the agricultural sector. So farmers can't get it, only a vet can, and a vet must basically create like a trail. So this animal is sick for this purposes, I'm administering this antibiotic. And they need to basically have like a registrar, like we have with certain drugs, like methadone and other drugs, where there are control mechanisms that actually say who's actually prescribing it and for what purpose. You can do the same thing in the actual veterinary, in the agricultural sector, to prevent corrupt veterinary people providing these large illegal quantities of this sort of stuff. And in some countries it's even legal. That's even worse, So let's not basically throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's realize that these have a result. They've resulted in massive reductions of death in the population. If we were to go back pre-use of all these sort of things, we would have seen massive deaths. Google, look at the past history. Don't listen to me, just look at the past history. If you want to really see, how people suffered. I mean, today people suffer because of chronic disease, and that's due to, unfortunately, the diets that are promoted, because the science has been corrupted in the food area, and we've got that. But can you imagine if we had that on top of, all these communicable diseases, the death rates that we would have had, how bad it is and how awful our environment and our societies would be? You'd be scared to go to the next town just in case you contracted something. Our freedom would be quite restricted. It used to be back in those days for those reasons, because, the potential risk if a town was basically, you'd have lockdowns and stuff like that, or people being discriminated against and all sorts of things. Far worse than today. Today's bad in some regards, but also we would have had these sort of things. Let's not basically make out and, talk about things that are really not real issues in that regard. So it's very important. Now, Nick heard that basically people were saying that compared to the other vaccines, that certain countries are refusing with the Sinovac, and some of these, he heard that basically they weren't as good, and that some people are saying that the mRNA are much better because they're closer to 95% and all that. Okay, let's take a look at this sort of data. So this is basically where Novavax is. When Moderna and Pfizer were actually done first in younger populations who've got a better immune system and also healthier and would respond much better. And also they were done in first world countries, and only in first world countries, because it was expensive to basically do it abroad because of the refrigeration issues. So the results were much better, obviously. So when they looked at Novavax, on the other hand, has been recently done in a lot of also the new strains, variants, not strains, variants around the world. And even though it's been done against all the new variants, which a lot of the others haven't, it's nearly getting to 90%. Not fucking bad, considering that it also is being done in a lot of countries around the world, third world countries as well, in older populations that are basically, more immune compromised, more lower vitamin D status, and all sorts of other issues that are confounding variables. And still, it's doing pretty well. Compared to the AstraZeneca, which is only 70% in terms of efficacy, based on February the 3rd, 2021 data, okay? So, and that's basically the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So they looked at a lot of this sort of information. So if you look at it, basically Johnson & Johnson, 66%, so Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca are basically both adeno preparations. There was no data on the Sinovacs, so I can't tell you. The other one, which was another product, the Sinopharm, that one was 79%, better than AstraZeneca, better than Johnson & Johnson. Don't have any information on Sputnik, but it would probably be, in the range of 70 plus, anywhere between 66 and 79, because they're all 66 and 70, which is similar to the other two adenovirus preparations, the Oxford, AstraZeneca, and the Johnson & Johnson. So basically, that's where that sort of data is. So it's doing pretty well, considering that basically it's a latecomer, and it's been basically having to deal with all the new variants, where a lot of these other ones were tested way back when the trials were done in terms of the old variants. So, considering that it's nearly close to the main players, Pfizer and Moderna, and we know that basically if you were to do Pfizer and Moderna today, you include a lot of third world countries and older populations, older people that have got more immune related issues, more other health issues and all that, comorbidities and whatever else in greater numbers, I suspect the efficacy would be not as high as they claim. So, people need to get a reality check. A lot of these efficacies are basically done on relating to different population groups and all that. This is not clinical, this is observational. So this is a lot of observational stuff around the world and being collated from observational studies with highly confounded population variations, variants, age groups, comorbidities, people that are smoking, people that are not smoking, all sorts of variations. These are not clinical. These are not basically people in a clinic locked in and basically tested to see what all vaccines are done with these groups and seeing exactly what, lock them in for about a couple of months and see what the response is. Generally speaking, most people are getting a pretty good result in terms of, because they've actually gone back and actually done some tests, both in people who have got the actual virus itself, who get lifetime immunity because they've actually done biopsies of bone marrow to verify that. That's another reason why I told Mira, don't bother with the Sinovax, you don't need it. Now that you've actually recovered, you will have lifetime based on the research that I've looked at. So pretty much, that's pretty much covered. At the end of the day, as I said, the Novavax is basically for people. It's a safer option. It's not a problem as far as I can see. It's got good efficaciousness and it doesn't have any of the risks. Now, here's adenoviruses and strokes. 253, okay? Severe adenovirus pneumonia. That's basically a clinical thing with 57 children. Severe adenovirus pneumonia, when it went mechanical ventilation. This is back in February to June 2019. Okay, so we know adenoviruses can be problematic in young children in particular. So that's a mouse model. We'll ignore that. Here's another case. Arterial ischemic stroke, heart-related issues. Quite a few other things here. More on strokes and atherosclerosis, lesions. Anyway, what I'm trying to actually make it clear to people is that there are issues here. So probably in the plants area, when it comes to supines, as an example, the lowest ones are, asparagus, garlic, and oats and stuff like that. Anyway, that was just for a bit of fun. What else was there that people were asking? I think I've covered everything in that regard. So that was one good point Dom came up with, that the progress of Novavax is disappointing, how slow it is. Yeah, I sort of agreed with that as well. He's sort of interesting approach to block the virus. Me talking about the actual, that at least some companies actually do take safety into consideration, which is basically those two prolines, those amino acids to basically at the receptor, so it doesn't react with cell receptors, which is good. We don't want that. We just want it to float through the bloodstream and be attacked by the immune system. So, and the, oops, wrong one. And the very small amount of saponin from a bark extract, which you can find in some, in quite a bit in certain foods, plant-based foods, and in some supplements. So where you get a sort of a hermetic effect and all that. But generally speaking, it's not an issue, guys. There's a lot of nonsense out there. Don't fall in the nonsense camp. Adenovirus, the two technologies is a viral vector, which is the adenovirus problem. That is a viral vector that's actually putting it in and then basically has some of it still has the viral coating, and that viral coating can interact and can be a problem, we know, with strokes and all sorts of things. So that's the reason why I say, well, it is a risk. I'm not saying it's going to happen to you. You may take it, nothing happens in a negative way in terms of stroke or whatever, but there is a risk from adenoviruses. Plus, it also has still the replicating systems in. Now it's replicating this. Is there a potential for cross-reactivity or replicating anything else or something else, another viral system hijacking the system. I don't know. These are all sorts of possibilities. We know viruses exchange with viruses, take things, intermix and all that. When you're only dealing with a spike proteins, a deactivated spike protein just floating around, that's not a problem. It's only when it's still got its own RNA mechanisms to be able to get into the receptor to get into the cell and replicate itself. That's the actual virus. Or you actually provide part of that mechanism to create a lot of viral particles of deactivated as they do, but they still got, the receptor on there. Can they react in other parts? That's the problem with those mRNA or the adenovirus. So whether you're using the actual replicating mechanism to go in there and replicate the actual, like the mRNA, the actual spike to replicate that in order to get an immune response, or you're using a virus as a vehicle to take that same mechanism in, is very much like the real thing in a sense. And that's where I have a problem with that. That this is new technology, which we've used in some other areas, but we've actually seen side effects and issues. And we're seeing some side effects and issues in Israel and a few other places where they're at least recording case studies. In a lot of other parts of the world, they're not recording case studies, or I haven't heard of any. And I would say we're getting these people with problems and we're dealing with them, but no Australian scientist or Australian medical doctor in a hospital who's actually treating these people is actually writing up a case study for these people and then publishing it. And I think that is a disservice to the community. Basically, if you're a medical doctor and you've actually seen something which you're told shouldn't be happening, you should be writing up a case study and you should be sending it to a publisher, letting them know, like the Israeli doctors are doing, and some of the scientists there are letting people know we're having these problems. We're having problems with, these sort of reactivating certain other viruses, doing these other things, causing certain autoimmunity and other issues, these mRNA ones. The other stuff is the stroke stuff, which we've seen and all that. Now, it may be limited, but even if it's a small percentage of the population, that small percentage can still amount to millions of people or hundreds of thousands, Maybe we shouldn't have used this, because we're sort of saying we've got an emergency system and we've put it in place and we say, well, we're just going to push it out as fast as possible. Maybe we should have said from the beginning, you've got to make it in the traditional way. You can't make something that actually operates a bit like the virus because there could be related issues. We know there's stuff in the literature why we're using these methods when we don't have to. Novavax hasn't. And a lot of other companies that have created flu vaccinations or whatever don't use these methods. They may in the future. So we'll have to keep an eye on that front as well, because it seems like they want to use this technology for a whole lot of other things. And that's very concerning, to say the least. But the thing is that what we need to understand is, guys, is we need to stop listening to crackpots, okay? There is nothing wrong with basically liposomal technology. It's been used for ages for all sorts of delivery systems, both for drugs and for supplements. And there is no issue whatsoever. And there's even people in the naturopathic world that actually use liposomal technology for the same stuff, and they've been using it for a number of years. No issues. Sarah, Bart's friend, she uses liposomal stuff in her sort of practice in the UK. And there are many others. This is just technology normal. It's what you put in the liposomal, which is the issue. Now, you can actually put a dead spike with 2 prolines so it doesn't react with a cell, and let it just float with an adjunct to basically entice the immune system to respond to it. That's fine, as far as I'm concerned. Or you can put in that a vitamin D supplement for people who have got malabsorption issues. Great, not a problem. Or you can put something like a mRNA thing inside it to deliver in a stealthy way into the actual cell so it can replicate. Or as a vehicle for some sort of vector virus like the AstraZeneca or the others, with potential side effects as well of strokes and things like that. Now, this is looking at the literature, at what I've found, and my understanding of the literature. It's also my personal opinion. This is not medical advice for anyone. You should always seek medical advice from your physician, not from me. But this is just a supplementary to cover some of these points that people are making up just crap. They're focusing on the non-real issue. The real issue is the autoimmunity side of the mRNAs and sort of reactivation of certain other viruses and stuff like that, sort of the cross-reactivity and stuff like that. That's an issue, and it has nothing to do with the liposomal vehicle, nothing to do with that. And the other thing is the other types, which is the vector, the viral vector forms, which are using adenoviruses, and they've had issues in terms of strokes and stuff like that. And we've seen, I showed you guys, that's on PubMed. It's not Harry Sapano saying, that's PubMed saying it, okay? That's the official, the National Institute of Health. They put all these studies up there for people to look at and read. So that's what they're saying, that there are some issues. I'm not saying that this is going to affect you. You may take it, it may have no effect. But would I take the risk? No. With Novavax, not an issue. And probably, if I let's say I got COVID like Mira did, I probably wouldn't actually bother vaccinating at all. But currently I'm not. I'm basically just using vitamin D to maintain good immune response. So if I do get something, my immune system will protect me. It'll be in a good place. It'll have enough vitamin D to fill up those receptors of the immune system and deal with it, like I did in Mira's case with her vitamin D usage. But if I don't get it and I want to travel, which I do, I may be forced to take the jab option. And the safest jab that I can see is this one, Novavax. I recently had the flu vax. I don't have a problem with that either. That's fine. It's done in the traditional way. I checked, so I didn't have a problem with that. If they alter it in the future, I'll probably reconsider. But that's for another day, another conversation. But in this case, I look at how is it done? How does it operate? What is the risk benefit type thing? Assessing all the different factors. And as far as I can see, a lot of the factors that people are talking about are irrelevant. There is no basis. And I actually challenge anyone to come on my live stream and provide, I'll give them a link, come on and provide me evidence for their arguments in terms of these things. There aren't any. If they're talking about the stuff inside, that's a different thing. Don't mix up the two. If the spikes of the mRNA formulation or whatever, but you have to show me that there is toxicity of a liposomal. If that's the case, we're all fucked because our brains are full of these bilayer lipids, if they were that. They are using lipids. Now, somebody may say, well, Harry, what about if they're using seed oils as their source of these lipids? Even if they were using that source, let's say as an example now, it would be so minuscule. We're talking about now the utilization of lipids of very tiny, and I don't believe that they are in that regard, because they would, if they were too rancid and too damaged, they wouldn't maintain their integrity, so they wouldn't actually be able to work. But let's say, for argument's sake, they decided to be stupid about it, and they just decided to create these idiotic vaccines, which they don't. These are purified phospholipids, which are stable and all that. They have to be at that size. Otherwise, they will fall apart. They'll degrade. They have to basically be stable. They can't be reactive. Okay? But let's say they're not. These are really just evil people creating, deliberately using these seed oils. The amount of seed oil is so tiny, you would have to eat like you'd have to basically consume less than a gram of, let's say, potato chip that was cooked. And I suspect many of you have consumed far more of this stuff. And I suspect there's shitloads more still incorporated in your cells and inside your fat cells from all the shit you ate in the past. And you're worried about nanometer size potential. Give us a fucking break. Grow up. Basically grow up. If you think that's toxic, and you're guzzling all the other shit down for years, grow up. That's how illogical these things are. They've got no logical basis whatsoever. And it's no wonder some people, think that we're crackpots, because they listen to all this nonsense and go, what the hell are these people talking about? And I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. There's the crackpots on this side of, that are talking all the shit. And then there's all the others saying, well, there's no problem here to see. I'm going, no. I'm the reasonable person in the middle and saying, no, there is issues. They are affecting some people, others more than others. There are other underlying potential future risks as well. That's speculative on my part, but looking at the literature, there are risks in that regard. And that's what I'm putting forward. Not anything bizarre or crazy or weird. I'm putting through credible arguments. And I'm looking at all the other stuff and saying, there's no problems here with this sort of that element or this element, but there could be with the way these ones are actually operating in terms of this new technology approach of mRNA and viral vector. Those are the ones primarily I have an issue with, because it's not a traditional way we've actually got this material into our bodies. And, it's all, I don't like something being in there, incorporating into my cells and replicating. All sorts of problems potentially that could arise from that. And that's where I've got a problem with that technology. It's untested in terms of these vaccine types. It's new. And when it's been used in the past, there's been problems associated with it. So should we be using this? Probably not. Wouldn't have been I don't think it should have been allowed in the beginning. They should have basically told these companies, nope, you've got to use a traditional approach, like Novavax did, like Sinovac did, and all these other entities did. The way you actually do things like the flu vax or stuff like that. We wouldn't be talking this shit now. We wouldn't be arguing about all these issues and risks and all that. But the thing is, the risks assessments that I make are reasonable. And I'm saying it's not worth the risk. Maintain good vitamin D status until Novavax becomes available. That's what I'm saying. And I'll keep to that. But I'm definitely not going to basically subscribe to all the crackpot ideas that are out there about some of the elements of the technology which are used in all sorts of other preparations, like liposomal stuff, which is a non-issue, or small amounts of material like saponins or whatever, or even aluminium or whatever, small amounts, minuscule trace amounts, when people are ingesting much larger amounts, either in their food supply or being exposed in their immediate environment. You know, the order of magnitude is massive, and then these people are making out that there's a problem here, and I'm going, are you fucking insane? There is no damn problem. Grow up. Can you seriously argue that? And that's why I say to them, I challenge them, show me the data, show me the evidence. They've got nothing. It's just all idle. Where our speculation is not idle speculation. It's based on research. It's based on information in the field, and even other academics which have got a lot of misgivings about these technologies. That's what it's based on. Now, those academics and we could be wrong about the mRNA stuff and the viral vector. But from what I've seen, some of the reactivity and some of the case studies that have come out from a few areas that are still doing good case studies and have good ethics as researchers and doctors in some parts of the world and doing these things, we are seeing some issues, and we need to be honest about them. When we look at more traditional approaches, we're not seeing those issues. And the other thing is to remember that even if in the people where in terms of the efficacy type stuff, the results that some people, I think it was Nick that actually mentioned, even on that front, when it comes to the Novavax, at the end of the day, the research that I showed in the previous video was quite emphatic. Nobody was hospitalized or died in the intervention group. That means the group that got the jab of Novavax. But people in the placebo group that got basically injected with a whole lot of water, some sort of saline solution, basically a number of them ended up in ICU and died. So that is that. So I would say the results were pretty good in that regard, and they were done in diverse populations around the world and all that. So I'm quite confident that it will confer good immunity to the majority of people that utilize Novavax. I wish it was available earlier. I'm disappointed that basically the company didn't get a lot of support from governments in terms of money. So it took them longer to get it to market. And some of the bigger players like Pfizer and Moderna and all that, who have got more political clout and are able to get access to more money from governments, were able to basically get to market earlier with technologies which have got a lot of issues associated with them. And that's what we need to be, quite honest about these things and look at case studies and point these out. We shouldn't be making up shit, and we shouldn't basically be circulating on the internet things that are basically untruths or, massive overblown speculations and stuff like that. I know it's great for clickbait, but it's fake news, it's garbage, and it basically makes us look to the majority of the population out there as crackpots. And, as far as I'm concerned, if people promote that sort of shit, they're not part of my tribe. And I wish, them no ill will and good health, but I would prefer that they're not associated with me in that regard. So, as I've said in the past, I hold strong opinions on a number of matters, and I don't give a shit whether my subscribers like those opinions or don't, because at the end of the day, you're not paying my bills. I am with my hard work, and the rest of it you're getting for free, and you should be happy that I'm not a crackpot and I'm somebody that basically looks at the stuff, at the literature, and provides you and objective as much as possible. Even myself, I'm not perfect, never claim to be, but as much as possible, I try to get to the root of the matter and try to basically provide a, as good an opinion on these things based on the limited information that even I have available to myself, which is the majority of us have limited information. So my sources are basically PubMed. My sources are basically certain other reports and reviews that have been done and case studies, and that's that's what I can base my judgment on, those sort of things. Beyond that, speculating beyond that is basically crack pottery as far as I'm concerned. So my speculations are based on reasonable, reasonable speculations, because they're based on, there is evidence, case studies, and all sorts of things of certain reactivity and certain things happening. And so when I say something, it's based on that. But at the same time, I can't say, it's going to affect you, or it's going to affect that other person, or how many people it's going to affect. That is impossible to determine what the effects will be. Down the track, in a couple of years' time, when all the research has been done, when proper investigations have been looked at these things, we will know far more what worked, what didn't work, what sort of reactivity, what sort of percentages in the population and all that. We'll be more aware of exactly. The effects may have been minor, but they may also be greater than expected. We don't know, because there's still a lot of things that haven't been collated or researched or basically printed yet. So until that happens, all we can say is there are risks related with these two methods, with a viral vector and the mRNA, but how bad and how many people are going to be affected in a negative way is very hard to say. But since there are associated risks with these things, why take the risk? That's what I'm saying. Where with a more traditional approach, we know it's less of a problem. I'm not saying it's perfect. Some people, even to the virus itself, even in a deactivated form, may react, overreact, or whatever. We've had cases, very rare, but it has. But at the end of the day, these people would have actually ended up getting the actual virus and ended up even in a worse state than probably from the vaccine. So, it's basically an old saying: a cliff, and behind are rapids. So either way, you're sort of fucked in that sort of situation. And that, there are people in that sort of situation, but it's unfortunate. All I can say for people, in terms of, even when you're vaccinating with the Novavax, I'll be making sure that my vitamin D status is at a very good level. So there is no overreacting. My immune system will work properly, deal with a problem, and basically create, that immunity. That's what I want. And it's like anybody that's got a good immune system, because they've got good vitamin D status, their body will react appropriately. So those who don't want to take any jab whatsoever, my recommendation to those people is maintain good levels of vitamin D status. And those who, because of travel, because of work related or whatever, feel that compelled that at some point they'll have to do something, Novavax is your safest option on that front. In particular, if you've got good vitamin D status, you're not going to get any potential negative effects whatsoever. Because even with a deactivated thing, you don't know how your immune system is going to respond. So I always say, maintain good vitamin D status. I think a lot of the problems with overreacting of the immune system, because controlling and preventing cytokine storms and the overreaction of the immune system is what vitamin D does. And I've explained that from my first video. If you go right back to my first video, it's the thing that I talked about. The first thing that I brought up, vitamin D. So respiratory infection, vitamin D is your best protection. You know, Mira took 3 injections of 10,000 IUs, sorted her the whole problem out, and she's fine and doing well. You know, so she's back to her normal, you know, colourful self, and that's, you know, and I'm happy about that. So some people are going to take that option and say, well, I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to maintain vitamin D status. If I get it, I get it, you know, so be it. That's fine. I've got no problems with that. You know, others will say, well, I need to basically, you know, do something. I have an have to have an option because work-related, travel or whatever. You know, Novavax is probably your best option. If I think somebody asked me, I can't remember, I think it may be Nick, said if you had the only option for the travel purpose, which one would you take? And I think he mentioned Moderna or Sinovac, and I definitely said Sinovac. Simple as that. And the reason for that, again, it's more like the flu vax. It's not going to be a problem. There's no mechanisms in there that are replicating away or doing things. It's just the dead virus particles, and that's all. So I'm fine with that. You're just going to get an immune response, and you will basically then have immunity. Done, sorted, end of story. And that's sort of my approach. But you know, please, guys, don't fall for the nonsense out there. There's plenty of it, and all it does is it undermines our message. You know, when you give people good advice, credible advice, people will listen to that. Will say, okay, you've actually got evidence here. You've actually got proof of these things, of these risk factors. And you're pointing, you're not an anti-vax, because I'm not an anti-vax, as you guys know, but you're pointing to other options that are available, you know, for people. And you're giving people options, whether vitamin D or Novavax. And so that's what I'm trying to do. You know, I'm not trying to tell people what to do. I'm trying to provide information, and then it's up to you what you do with that information, which direction you go. But please don't fall for the nonsense, because there's plenty of it out there, and it doesn't help anyone in the long run, and it undermines our credibility. You know, reasonable people, it undermines our credibility, it undermines your own credibility with your relatives and friends, because they're going to look at that and say, oh, there's no way. But if you've actually got, you can use this video and say, well, look at this. There's actually research here. There's actually case studies here. There's actually stuff that actually is really happening. And there are 2 other options. One is vitamin D. The other one is basically Novavax. You know, take your pick, in a sense, is what you're telling them. And that's a reasonable thing to say. They won't think you're a crackpot or you're talking just garbage. So, exactly. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. That's me ranting, and I'll leave it at that. Anyway, see yous. Keep up the controversial comments, because it'll give me reasons to create other videos to debunk those things. Anyway, see yous.